In the wind-swept hills of Willow Creek Valley, where autumn leaves dance like whispered memories of the past, lives a widow who tends her small farm with weathered hands and quiet determination. Margaret Meg Thorne has spent 5 years building an honest life from the stubborn soil, but beneath her modest farmer's demeanor lies a past stained with notorious deeds. For before she grew wheat and corn, she rode with the infamous Red River Raiders, the most feared outlaws west of the Mississippi. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clings to the rolling hills surrounding Meg Thorne's farmstead as she moves through her daily routine with practiced efficiency. Her calloused hands guide the plow with the same precision she once used to handle more dangerous tools, though none of her neighbors would ever suspect that the quiet widow who brings the finest produce to the weekly market once orchestrated the most daring train robberies across 3 territories. The local folks see only what she carefully presents, a hard-working woman who coaxed life from tired soil after her husband's passing, nothing more remarkable than another weather-beaten farmer trying to make ends meet in challenging times. The farmhouse stands like a sentinel against the autumn sky, its weathered boards and solid foundation telling their own story of persistence and renewal. To casual observers, the property appears unremarkable, a modest 2-story home with attached barn, surrounded by neat rows of crops and the usual collection of farm implements. What they don't notice is how each building has been positioned with tactical precision, how every seemingly random feature of the landscape serves multiple purposes, how 5 years of careful modifications have transformed an ordinary farm into something far more formidable. Through her kitchen window, Meg watches young Tommy Baker riding his father's horse down the dirt road that passes her property. The boy waves cheerfully, and she returns the gesture with the gentle smile she's cultivated to match her assumed identity. Her eyes automatically track his movement, noting distance and speed with the unconscious calculation of someone who once timed stagecoach routes down to the second. The skills that made her the most successful outlaw in 3 territories haven't diminished. They've simply been redirected into more peaceful pursuits. "Morning, Mrs. Thorne," Tommy calls out, reining his horse to a stop. "Pa wanted me to ask if you'll be bringing those sweet corn ears to market tomorrow. Says they're the best he's ever tasted." "Wouldn't miss it, Tommy," Meg responds, her voice carrying that particular softness that makes people lean in to hear, a stark contrast to the sharp commands she once barked across chaotic robberies. As she talks with the boy, her peripheral vision maintains its constant sweep of the surrounding area, old habits honed by years of watching for posses and rival gangs. The farm bell chimes softly in the morning breeze as Sarah Miller approaches, on foot, carrying her usual basket of fresh bread and the weight of the town's gossip. The shopkeeper's wife has taken it upon herself to look after Meg since her husband's passing, a carefully crafted story about a peaceful farmer lost to fever. If Sarah only knew that John Thorne had been Meg's lieutenant in the Red River Raiders, that their marriage certificate was as much a cover as it was a commitment, that his real death came in a blazing shootout with the Pinkerton agents who'd nearly exposed their new identities. "Meg, dear," Sarah's voice carries concern today, not just gossip. "Have you heard about the Davidson place? 3rd farm hit this month. They say it's the Hawkins gang moved down from the Dakota Territory. Been burning out homesteaders who won't sell, taking everything they've got before setting the torch." Meg's hands never pause in their work of sorting seed corn, but her mind catalogues the information with professional precision. The Hawkins gang, 5 brothers, 2 cousins, known for escalating violence. She'd crossed paths with them years ago before trading her 6-shooter for a plow. They'd been sloppy then, young. Reports suggested they'd gotten worse, more brutal, less disciplined. Terrible business, Meg murmurs, her voice carrying just the right amount of sheltered concern. 5 years of playing the simple farmer's widow have made her performance flawless. Behind her, her foot rests on a loose floorboard that would drop. Her old Henry rifle right into her hands. Some habits die harder than others. Through the window, she spots dust on the horizon. Riders approaching from the east. Their formation is too tight for simple travelers. Their horses too well matched for honest farmers. More importantly, they ride like men who've never faced real consequences for their actions, sitting tall and obvious against the skyline. Tommy. Her voice remains gentle, but carries an edge that makes the boy sit straighter, some ancient instinct recognizing the tone of command. Best head on home now. Take the back road past Miller's Creek. She turns to Sarah, her movements unhurried but purposeful. Sarah, dear, I believe I heard your William calling for you earlier. Best not keep him waiting. Both leave just as the riders enter the valley, their horses' hooves drumming a rhythm Meg knows too well, the sound of trouble arriving with the mistaken belief that it's found easy prey. She continues sorting her seed corn, each movement selected and replaced with the same smooth precision she once used to count out stolen gold coins. Her fingers trace the neat rows of kernels, following patterns that just happen to mark the exact distances to every crucial position around her farm. The life she built here, the respect she's earned, the peace she's found, it all hangs by a thread as thin as the lie she's lived for 5 years. But if the Hawkins gang thinks they've found another vulnerable target, another lonely widow to terrorize, they're about to learn why some pasts are better left unexplored, and why some reputations, though buried, never truly die. Through her farmhouse window, Meg watches the first signs of approaching danger ripple through Willow Creek Valley like wind through autumn wheat. The valley has changed since she first claimed this land, with forged papers and borrowed identity. 5 years of honest toil transforming suspicious neighbors into trusting friends. Yet old instincts, honed through years of outlaw life, never truly fade. They sharpen now as she notes subtle shifts in the community's rhythm that most would overlook. Sheriff Taylor's weekly patrol passes her property earlier than usual, his horse's gait carrying the tension of a man bearing unwelcome news. Through years of watching law enforcement movements, first as prey and now as supposed ally, Meg reads the signs others miss. The way his hand rests closer to his holster, how his eyes scan the horizon with professional concern, the slight adjustment to his usual route that gives him better visibility of approaching riders. "Morning, Mrs. Thorne," he calls out, reining his horse to a stop near her fence. His voice carries forced casualness, but Meg recognizes the undertone of carefully contained worry. "Fine day for planting." "Indeed it is, Sheriff," she responds, maintaining her role as the simple widow farmer while her mind calculates possibilities, though the wind speaks of change coming. "That it does, ma'am." He shifts in his saddle, choosing his next words with care. "Heard from the Ferguson place over in Pine Valley. Hawkins' gang's been through there. 3 farms burned out. Folks run off their land. They're moving this way, working the valleys one by one." Meg's hands never pause in their work of checking fence posts, but her awareness sharpens with combat clarity. "Terrible business," she offers softly, her voice carrying just the right amount of sheltered concern, "though surely they wouldn't trouble our peaceful valley." The sheriff's expression darkens. "They trouble anywhere they think they can profit from fear, ma'am. Might want to consider staying with friends in town for a spell, especially being out here alone." If he only knew how many times she'd faced down worse threats than the Hawkins boys, how many pazis she'd outmaneuvered across territories where law was more suggestion than reality. The woman he sees, the quiet widow tending her modest farm, is as carefully cultivated as her cornrows, each detail of her performance refined through years of practice. Through her peripheral vision, she spots William Miller's wagon approaching, loaded heavier than usual for a simple supply run. The shopkeeper's weekly deliveries have become an important source of valley news, and today his face carries the weight of growing concerns. "Mrs. Thorne," he greets her, his usual cheerful manner subdued, "brought those seeds you asked for, and Sarah sent along some fresh bread." He glances at the sheriff, then continues in a lower voice. "Word's spreading about the Hawkins gang. They hit the Thompson place yesterday. Old man Thompson tried to stand up to them. He trails off, his meaning clear without details. Meg accepts the delivery with quiet gratitude, her mind processing the information with professional efficiency. The Hawkins gang is escalating, growing bolder with each success. Their pattern suggests Willow Creek Valley will be next. Prosperous, enough to be worth hitting, isolated enough to intimidate. They'll expect the usual response, a community too afraid to fight back, a sheriff handicapped by law and procedure, farmers who will surrender their land rather than risk violence. What they won't expect is a widow who spent 5 years maintaining her skills while building a life worth protecting. A woman who knows that sometimes the best defense isn't in how obviously you carry your weapons, but in how carefully you prepare for their use. The valley buzzes with nervous energy as more reports filter in throughout the day. Meg observes through her window as neighbors hurry between farms, sharing news in hushed tones. The stage arrives late, its driver pushing hard, another break in routine that sets her combat instincts humming. She notes how the younger men gather at the smithy, their attempts at casual conversation betrayed by tension in their stance. How mothers keep children closer to home, how the usual evening socializing has been replaced by early shuttered windows and locked doors. Sarah Miller returns as afternoon shadows lengthen, her usual gossip replaced by genuine fear. "Meg, you can't stay out here alone. William says we have room. Or the Bakers offered their spare bedroom. The Hawkins gang, they're not just taking money or valuables. They're forcing people to sign over their land, burning out anyone who refuses." Meg's hands remain steady as she prepares dinner, each movement precise while serving multiple purposes. Checking sight lines becomes adjusting curtains, securing weapons transforms into organizing kitchen tools, calculating fields of fire disguises itself as rearranging furniture. "Thank you, Sarah, but I'll be fine. This farm is all I have left. Of John, I won't abandon it." Her friend's concern deepens. "It's not about abandoning, Meg. It's about surviving. You don't know what these men are capable of." A ghost of a smile touches Meg's lips as she continues her preparations. If Sarah only knew what she was capable of, how many possés she'd outshot, how many lawmen she'd outmaneuvered before choosing this quiet life. The Hawkins gang will see what everyone else sees, a widow alone, vulnerable, an easy target to prove their power over the valley. They'll learn, as others learned years before, why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed. 5 years of peace are about to meet violence that doesn't understand the danger it's awakening, and the Hawkins boys are about to discover why some ghosts from the past are best left to their rest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The first riders appear at dawn, their silhouettes dark against the rising sun as they crest the eastern ridge above Willow Creek Valley. Meg observes their approach through her kitchen window while maintaining the appearance of ordinary morning routine. Her hands move steadily, preparing breakfast with practiced efficiency, but her mind calculates distances, angles, and potential. Approaches with the precision that once made her the most successful outlaw in 3 territories. 3 men, she notes, watching their careful descent into the valley, scouts for the main force, their formation suggesting professional experience despite their obvious attempt to appear casual. Their horses move with the smooth grace of well-cared-for mounts, not the worn-down animals typical of simple drifters. More telling is how they pause at specific points, studying sight lines and potential defensive positions with the methodical attention of men planning more than a simple passing visit. The morning light catches on rifle barrels poorly concealed beneath long coats, Winchester repeaters if she's reading the silhouettes correctly, the kind of firepower that speaks of serious intent rather than opportunistic banditry. Through years of planning her own operations, Meg recognizes the signs of carefully orchestrated intimidation. The Hawkins gang wants the valley to know they're coming, wants fear to do half their work before they ever fire a shot. Sheriff Taylor appears on his morning patrol, his path intersecting with the riders near the crossroads. Meg notes how his hand rests near his holster, how his deputy positions himself with careful casualness near the general store, creating overlapping fields of fire. Amateur work, she thinks, remembering more sophisticated operations from her past, but speaking to growing tension in the peaceful community. "Morning, gentlemen," Taylor's voice carries clearly across the still morning air. "Don't recall seeing you in these parts before." The lead rider, a tall man with a cavalry slouch, touches his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Just passing through, Sheriff. Heard this valley might have opportunities for investment." "We're simple farming folk here," Taylor responds, his tone carrying steel beneath its professional surface. "Not much call for outside investment." The rider's laugh holds no humor. "Times are changing, Sheriff. Smart folks learn to adapt. Shame when accidents happen to those who don't understand progress." The threat hangs in the morning air like gunsmoke after a firefight. Meg continues her breakfast preparation while her peripheral vision tracks every movement, every subtle shift of weight that might telegraph violent intent. She notes how the riders position themselves, how they maintain clear lines of retreat, how their apparent casualness masks practiced coordination. They're good, she acknowledges, but she's seen better, been better in her time with the Red River Raiders. Sarah Miller hurries across the yard, her usual morning visit carrying unusual urgency. The shop bell chimes softly as she enters, her face tight with concern. "Meg, you need to hear this. William talked to the stage driver last night. The Hawkins gang hit 3 more farms in Pine Valley. They're not just burning people out anymore. They're—" She hesitates, glancing nervously at the window where the riders can be seen conversing with Taylor. "They're making examples of anyone who resists. The Thompson girls barely got away when they came for their father's place." Meg's hands never pause in their work, but her mind processes this information with professional efficiency. The Hawkins gang is escalating, following a pattern she's seen before. Create fear, demonstrate power, break resistance before making demands. Amateur tactics, but effective against peaceful communities, unused to organized violence. Through her window, she watches the riders complete their circuit of the valley's main road. Their eyes linger on key properties, the mill, the smithy, the larger farms. When they reach her modest homestead, the lead rider reins his horse to a stop, studying her house with predatory interest. Meg maintains her peaceful routine, appearing absorbed in domestic tasks, while her combat awareness notes every detail. The way his right hand rests too close to his coat, how his companions position themselves to cover multiple angles, how their eyes scan for signs of defense or weakness. "Ma'am," he calls out, his voice carrying that false politeness that precedes violence. "Fine morning for farming." "That it is," Meg responds, her voice soft enough to make him lean forward to hear. The movement compromises his shooting position, though he likely doesn't realize it. "Though I suspect you gentlemen aren't here about agriculture." A smile touches his face, devoid of warmth. "Smart woman. Might want to keep that wisdom in mind when certain business opportunities present themselves. Times are changing in these valleys," Shame if anything unfortunate were to happen before we could discuss such matters properly. Meg continues her work, each movement precise while appearing casual. Indeed, though unfortunate things can happen to anyone, sir, sometimes wisdom lies in recognizing which opportunities are better left unexplored. Something in her steady gaze makes him shift slightly in his saddle, some ancient instinct perhaps recognizing the predator behind her peaceful demeanor. The moment stretches like drawn steel before he yanks his horse's head around, covering his unease with bravado. "We'll be seeing you again, ma'am. Best think carefully about your position before then." She watches them ride away, their attempts at menacing dignity undermined by the amateur nature of their intimidation tactics. Through years of running her own operations, she recognizes their type. Men who mistake violence for strength, who believe fear equals control. They'll be back, she knows, with more men and greater demands. They'll expect to find a vulnerable widow, easily frightened into submission. Instead, they've unknowingly crossed paths with a legend they thought was just a story, a ghost from the past who never stopped preparing for moments exactly like this. 5 years of peace are about to meet violence that doesn't understand the danger it's awakening. And the Hawkins boys are about to learn why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed. The midday sun beats down on Willow Creek Valley as Meg observes the ripples of fear spreading through her community. Through her farmhouse window, she watches groups of neighbors hurrying between properties, their usual casual visits replaced by urgent purpose. Sheriff Taylor's deputy rides hard down the main road, dust rising behind him as he carries news between scattered homesteads. The valley's peaceful rhythm has been disrupted, transformed by the morning's visitors into something tenser, more brittle. William Miller's wagon approaches her farm, loaded with supplies that speak of preparation rather than routine commerce. His wife Sarah sits beside him, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by barely contained worry. Meg continues her daily tasks while noting how their arrival coincides with the gathering of several other neighbors. The Bakers, old Thompson from the South Valley, and young James Ferguson, whose family lost their farm to the Hawkins gang last week. "Meeting at the church tonight," William announces without preamble as he steps down from the wagon. Valley's got to decide how to handle this situation before it gets worse. His voice carries the strain of a man watching his peaceful world unravel. Sheriff's sent word to the territorial marshal, but help's 3 days away at best. Hawkins. "Gang won't wait that long." Meg's hands remain steady as she helps unload supplies, each movement precise while her mind calculates possibilities. Through years of planning her own operations, she recognizes the critical moment when a community's fear either breaks them or binds them together. "What are folks saying?" she asks softly, her voice carrying that gentle tone that makes people forget to look deeper. Sarah wrings her hands, glancing nervously at the horizon. Some want to fight, mostly the younger men who don't understand what that really means. Others talk about paying whatever the Hawkins gang demands, hoping they'll move on. Thompson's boy rode in from Pine Valley, says they're not just taking money anymore. They're forcing people to sign over their land, using the papers to make it all look legal. Through her window, Meg spots more neighbors arriving, drawn by some unspoken understanding that decisions must be made. Young Tommy Baker hovers at the edge of the gathering, his usual exuberance dampened by the adults' tension. She notes how the men position themselves, unconsciously creating defensive formations they don't even recognize. Old warriors' instincts surfacing in farmers' souls. "They hit the Davidson place last night," James Ferguson reports, his young face hard with recent memory. "Burned the barn first, said it was a warning. When old man Davidson tried to stop them." He trails off, but his meaning hangs clear in the afternoon air. Meg listens, while appearing absorbed in routine tasks, her mind processing each piece of information with professional efficiency. The Hawkins gang is following a pattern she's seen before, one she used herself in more ruthless days. Isolate, intimidate, then squeeze until resistance crumbles. Amateur work compared to how the Red River Raiders operated, but effective against peaceful folk unused to organized violence. "What about you, Meg?" Sarah asks suddenly, concern sharpening. Her voice, "Out here alone, your place will be one of their first targets. You should come stay in town, at least until—" "I appreciate the worry," Meg interrupts gently, her hands never pausing in their work. "But this farm is all I have. Some things are worth protecting." Her words carry weight her neighbors can't fully understand. Born from years when she rode with outlaws who mistook violence for strength before she learned the true meaning of having something worth defending. Sheriff Taylor arrives as afternoon shadows lengthen, his presence adding gravity to the impromptu gathering. "Got word from up north," he announces, voice pitched low but carrying clearly. "Hawkins' gang's grown since Pine Valley, picking up strays and opportunists, building themselves a regular army. 20, maybe 30 riders now." The news ripples through the assembled neighbors like wind through dry grass. Meg notes their reactions with professional assessment, who straightens with determination, who shrinks with fear, who looks to others for guidance. Through years of planning operations, she learned to read such signs, to understand how communities break or hold under pressure. "The territorial marshal's been notified," Taylor continues, though his tone suggests little hope from that quarter. "But we need to decide how to handle this ourselves. Can't wait for help that might come too late." The discussion that follows reveals the fractures Meg expected. Young men calling for immediate resistance, older folks counseling caution, mothers thinking of children, farmers calculating what they can afford to lose. She maintains her quiet presence at the gathering's edge, appearing to listen while her mind works through scenarios and contingencies she's prepared for over 5 years of peaceful farming. What her neighbors don't see is how each suggestion they make plays into preparations she's already laid, how their natural instincts for defense align with plans she's carefully crafted since claiming this land. They see a widow offering sympathetic silence, not a tactical mind assessing resources and plotting strategy. The sun settles toward distant hills as the gathering disperses, each family carrying away their own fears and decisions. Meg watches them go, noting how they cluster in small groups, how conversations continue in hushed tones, how glances turn repeatedly toward the eastern ridge where danger will appear. 5 years of peace have given her something she never had with the Red River Raiders. A community worth protecting, a place worth defending, a cause beyond mere survival or profit. The Hawkins gang is about to learn what she discovered long ago, that sometimes the most dangerous force isn't the most obvious, and that some ghosts from the past are best left undisturbed. As evening approaches Willow Creek Valley, the church bell tolls with unusual urgency, calling the community together for decisions that will shape their future. Meg observes from her farmhouse porch as wagons and riders converge on the white steepled building, its windows glowing with lamplight against the darkening sky. Through years of reading communities she once preyed upon, she recognizes the critical moment when fear either shatters resistance or forges it into something stronger. Sarah Miller appears at her fence, wringing her hands with nervous energy. "You're coming to the meeting, aren't you, Meg? Everyone needs to have a voice in this." "Someone should keep watch," Meg responds softly, her eyes tracking movement along the ridgeline where the Hawkins gang's scouts had appeared that morning. Meetings like this tend to draw attention from interested parties. Through her careful observation, she notes subtle changes in the valley's evening rhythm. The blacksmith's forge remains lit well past its usual hours, its glow accompanied by sounds that suggest work more urgent than routine repairs. The general store's back door sees unusual traffic, boxes and crates moved with careful purpose rather than casual commerce. Even the mill shows signs of preparation disguised as ordinary activity. Sheriff Taylor approaches her property, his horse's hooves striking dirt with measured precision. "Mrs. Thorne," he greets her, dismounting with the careful movement of a man expecting trouble. "Sure you won't reconsider joining us? Town's making important decisions tonight." Meg continues her peaceful routine, while her combat awareness notes how the sheriff positions himself to observe multiple approaches. "Some decisions," she responds quietly, "were made long before the moment demanded them." Her fingers trace the worn wood of her porch railing, following patterns that mark exact firing positions. She's measured countless times over 5 years of preparation. Through the gathering darkness, she watches more valley residents hurrying toward the church. The Thompson family, their faces still haunted by their narrow escape from the Hawkins gang. Young James Ferguson, his father's rifle carried with obvious unfamiliarity, the Baker clan moving as a tight group, even their usually boisterous children subdued by the evening's gravity. "Got word from Cedar Creek," Taylor reports, his voice lowered, though no one else is near. "Hawkins' gang's gathered more muscle than we thought. 35 riders at least, well armed with Winchester repeaters. They're not just burning farms anymore. They're taking over whole valleys, setting themselves up as lords over the territory." Meg's hands remain steady as she arranges her porch furniture, each movement precise while serving multiple purposes. "Men like that," she observes softly, remembering similar operations from her outlaw days, "mistake violence for authority. Think fear equals control." Sarah clutches her shawl tighter as a cool evening breeze carries the sound of raised voices from the church. Richard Baker's talking about organizing resistance, says we should fight before they get here, but against so many. "Numbers," Meg interrupts gently, "aren't always the deciding factor." Her eyes meet Taylor's with a steadiness that makes him study her more carefully. "Sometimes victory goes to those who've prepared more thoroughly, positioned more carefully, planned more patiently." Through the deepening twilight, she spots dust on the horizon. More riders approaching from the east. Their movement carries the deliberate pace of men conducting reconnaissance, studying the valley's gathering for signs of resistance or submission. The Hawkins gang's scouts, she recognizes, monitoring the community's response to their morning threats. "You're different tonight, Meg," Sarah observes suddenly, something in the widow's stance making her pause. "The way you watch everything, the way you move. And it's like you're not really a farmer at all, but something else entirely." Meg's smile carries no warmth as she makes final adjustments to her porch arrangements, each piece positioned for optimal coverage of approaching angles. "We all have choices to make," she responds softly. "Some choose to run, some to surrender, some to stand and fight. But the most important choices are often made long before the battle begins, in how we prepare, how we position ourselves, how we decide what's worth protecting." The church bell tolls again, calling stragglers to the meeting where the valley's fate will be debated. Through years of observing communities under threat, Meg recognizes the patterns unfolding, the desperate search for solutions, the fracturing of unity under pressure, the inevitable divide between those who would resist and those who would submit. What the Hawkins gang doesn't understand, what her peaceful neighbors can't suspect, is that the most critical decisions for this valley's future were made 5 years ago, when an infamous outlaw chose to build something worth defending instead of just taking what she wanted. The skills that once made her the most feared rider in the Red River Raiders haven't diminished. They've simply been redirected into more purposeful preparation. The evening deepens around Willow Creek Valley as Meg completes her preparations, each action precise while appearing routine. 5 years of peace have been her choice, but they've also been her preparation. The Hawkins gang thinks they're approaching another vulnerable community, never suspecting they're riding into a trap laid by someone who spent years studying exactly how men like them think, move, and make their fatal mistakes. Night settles over Willow Creek Valley as voices rise from the church meeting, carrying fragments of fear and determination across the darkening land. Meg maintains her vigilant watch from her strategic position on the farmhouse porch, noting how the Hawkins gang's scouts have grown bolder, their patrol patterns tightening around the community, gathering like wolves, circling wounded prey. Through her window, she observes the heated debate taking shape inside the church. Richard Baker stands at the pulpit, his usual farmer's calm replaced by passionate urgency as he rallies for immediate resistance. Across the aisle, Thomas Wilson advocates for negotiation, his recent losses in Pine Valley lending weight to his warnings about violent confrontation. The community fractures along predictable lines: youth versus experience, courage versus caution, pride versus pragmatism. Sheriff Taylor emerges from the church, his steps carrying the weight of a man bearing heavy news. "Council's divided," he reports, positioning himself where he can watch both the road and the ridgeline. Baker's got the younger folks ready to a fight, but Wilson's group is pushing for compromise, says paying protection money is better than losing everything. Meg's hands remain steady as she adjusts her rocking chair, each movement precise while serving multiple purposes. Compromise, she observes quietly, remembering similar negotiations from her outlaw days, only works when both sides value something beyond power. Men like the Hawkins gang see it as weakness to exploit, not respect to honor. Through the gathering darkness, she spots more subtle changes in the valley's rhythm. The blacksmith's apprentice moves between farms with suspicious purpose, his cargo carefully wrapped in burlap. Miller's store sees continued activity through its back entrance, though the front remains darkened. Even the peaceful Quaker family at the north end shows signs of preparation, disguised as routine evening chores. Sarah Miller returns from the meeting, her face tight with worry. "They're talking about collecting funds," she reports in a hushed voice, "enough to satisfy the Hawkins gang's initial demands. Thomas Wilson says his cousin's valley bought peace that way." She pauses, studying Meg with growing concern. "They mentioned your farm specifically, said as a widow alone you'd be particularly vulnerable. They're suggesting we all contribute extra to protect you." A ghost of a smile touches Meg's lips as she continues her careful observation of the valley. If they only knew how many puzzes she'd outshot, how many lawmen she'd outmaneuvered before choosing this quiet life. "Some things," she responds softly, "can't be protected with money. Some lines, once crossed, change everything that follows." The night air carries the sound of hoofbeats as another rider approaches. Young James Ferguson returning from scouting the eastern trails. His horse's labored breathing speaks of hard riding as he reins up before the church. "They're camped at Eagle's Bend," he announces to the gathering crowd. "Whole gangs there, more men than we thought. They've got wagons, too, like they're planning to stay." Meg processes this information with professional efficiency, her mind calculating distances and timing with the precision that once made her the most successful outlaw in 3 territories. Eagle's Bend lies 2 hours' ride east, close enough to maintain pressure on the valley, far enough to react to resistance. Amateur strategy, she thinks, remembering more sophisticated operations from her Red River Raiders days. Through her window, she watches the community meeting dissolve into smaller groups, each carrying their own fears and decisions into the night. Young men cluster around Richard Baker, their determination fueled by inexperience and pride. Older, Farmers gather with Thomas Wilson, calculating losses they might survive versus risks they dare not take. Women huddle in worried conversation, their thoughts on children and homes that could be caught in coming violence. "You're not afraid," Sarah observes suddenly, something in Meg's calm demeanor drawing her attention. "Everyone else is terrified, but you're watching everything like you've seen it all before." Meg's response carries layers of meaning her friend can't fully understand. "Fear," she says quietly, "makes people forget what they're capable of. Makes them think surrender is safer than standing firm." Her fingers trace the porch railing, following patterns that mark exact ranges to key positions throughout her property. Sometimes the strongest defense isn't in how obviously you show your strength, but in how carefully you've hidden it. The night deepens as more riders return from scouting missions, each report building a clearer picture of the threat gathering at Eagle's Bend. The Hawkins gang has assembled an impressive force, drawing cruel men from across the territory with promises of easy profit. They expect to find another vulnerable valley, another community too divided and frightened to resist effectively. What they cannot know, what even her peaceful neighbors don't suspect, is that they're about to face someone who spent years studying exactly how men like them think, move, and make their fatal mistakes. 5 years of peace have been Meg's choice, but they've also been her preparation. The Hawkins gang is about to learn why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed. Through the darkness, she watches her community struggle with decisions they think lie ahead, unaware that the most crucial choice was made 5 years ago when an infamous outlaw decided to build something worth defending instead of just taking what she wanted. The skills that once made her legend haven't diminished. They've simply been redirected into more purposeful preparation. The first grey light of dawn finds Meg completing her morning routine with practiced efficiency, each movement carefully, calculated while appearing natural. Through her farmhouse window, she observes the aftermath of last night's community meeting spreading through Willow Creek Valley like ripples in a disturbed pond. Wagons move between properties with unusual purpose, carrying cargo that seems heavier than normal farm supplies would warrant. Richard Baker approaches her property, his usual assured stride replaced by barely contained urgency. Behind him, she notes 3 more riders moving along the ridgeline. The Hawkins gang scouts maintaining their watch over the valley with growing boldness. They've grown careless in their surveillance, she observes, their confidence making them obvious against the morning sky. "Mrs. Thorne," Baker calls out as he reaches her fence, "Council's made some decisions. We're gathering funds for an initial payment, trying to buy time until the territorial marshal can respond." His voice carries the strain of a man trying to convince himself of his own words. "We've all agreed to contribute. Given your situation, the community will help cover your share." Meg continues her work in the garden, each movement precise, while her mind calculates distances and angles. "Generous offer," she responds softly, her voice carrying that gentle tone that makes others underestimate her. "Though I suspect money won't satisfy what these men really want." Through years of running her own operations, she recognizes the signs. The Hawkins gang isn't looking for simple profit. They're building an empire, using fear and violence to establish control over territory. Payment won't appease them. It will only confirm the valley's vulnerability. Sarah Miller arrives with her usual morning bread delivery, though today her basket carries more than baked goods. "They're collecting at the church," she reports in a hushed voice. "Thomas Wilson's handling the negotiations. Says if we're reasonable, show we're willing to cooperate, maybe they'll be reasonable too." A ghost of a smile touches Meg's lips as she accepts the basket, noting the weight of ammunition hidden beneath the loaves. If they only knew how many reasonable negotiations she'd conducted from the other side, How many communities she'd watched make the same desperate calculations before the Red River Raiders took everything anyway. Meg, Sarah continues, her voice tight with concern, the Hawkins gang. They're asking questions about specific properties, about owners who might be vulnerable. Your name came up. Through her peripheral vision, Meg spots more dust on the horizon, riders approaching from the east, their formation too precise for simple travelers. The Hawkins gang is sending representatives to begin their negotiations, she realizes, reading their approach with professional assessment. Amateur move, she thinks, remembering more sophisticated operations from her outlaw days, showing their hand too early, too obviously. Sheriff Taylor appears at her gate, his movement carrying the careful precision of a man expecting trouble. They're coming to talk terms, he announces without preamble. 2 riders approaching from Eagle's Bend. Thought you should know, being out here alone. Meg's hands never pause in their work, but her combat awareness sharpens with familiar clarity. Through her carefully positioned mirrors and windows, she tracks the approaching riders while appearing absorbed in routine tasks. Their approach speaks of experience with intimidation, but their obvious confidence betrays gaps in their tactical awareness. You should come to town, Sarah insists, watching the approaching riders with growing fear. At least until this is settled. A woman alone out here. Some things, Meg responds quietly, her voice carrying weight her friends can't fully understand, are worth standing for. Some choices have to be made long before the moment demands them. Her fingers trace the edge of her garden hoe, its balance perfect for more than just tilling soil. Another preparation disguised as farm work. The morning sun strengthens as 2 riders from the Hawkins gang approach her property, their horses' hooves striking dirt with deliberate slowness, an intentional show of confidence meant to intimidate. Through years of orchestrating similar scenes, Meg reads their intentions in every movement. They're here to assess her, to gauge her vulnerability, to determine if she'll be useful as an example to others who might resist. What they can't know, what even her concerned neighbors don't suspect, is that they're walking into a trap 5 years in the making. Every fence post, every garden row, every seemingly innocent feature of her farm has been positioned with tactical precision. The skills that once made her the most feared outlaw in 3 territories haven't diminished. They've simply been redirected into more purposeful preparation. The riders rein up before her gate, their postures carrying that artificial authority of men who mistake violence for strength. Mrs. Thorne, the leader calls out, his voice attempting a genteel tone that doesn't match his predatory assessment of her property. Heard you might be interested in discussing some business opportunities. Times being what they are, a woman alone might appreciate some protection. Meg continues her gardening, each movement measured while her mind calculates possibilities with combat-honed efficiency. Through years of reading men like these, she recognizes the threat beneath their false courtesy, the violence waiting behind. Their practice smiles. They see what they expect to see, a widow alone, vulnerable, an easy target to prove their power over the valley. They're about to learn, as others learned years before, why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed. 5 years of peace have been her choice, but they've also been her preparation. The Hawkins gang is about to discover why some ghosts from the past are best left to their rest. The morning sun climbs higher over Willow Creek Valley as Meg maintains her careful facade before the Hawkins gang's representatives. Through years of playing both sides of such encounters, she reads their intentions in every movement, every carefully chosen word, meant to mask threats with false courtesy. Fine property you have here, Mrs. Thorne, the lead rider continues, his eyes cataloguing potential weaknesses with predatory assessment. Shame how dangerous these valleys have become lately. Accidents happening to folks who don't understand how things are changing. Meg's hands never pause in their gardening, but her combat awareness tracks every subtle shift in their positions. The way the second rider drifts to her left, attempting to flank without appearing obvious, how their hands rest too close to their holsters, telegraphing violence while trying to project civility. "Indeed," she responds softly, her voice carrying that gentle tone that makes others lean in to hear. Though some changes aren't what they appear to be, some dangers aren't as obvious as others. Her fingers trace the edge of her garden hoe, following patterns that mark exact distances to every crucial position around her farm. Through her peripheral vision, she spots Sarah Miller watching anxiously from the road, William hovering protectively nearby. Other neighbors have appeared as well, maintaining careful distance while witnessing this first direct confrontation between the Hawkins gang and their community. "Way we see it," the leader continues, his false smile tightening. "Smart. Folks understand the need for cooperation these days. Contribution to the valley's protection, you might say, those who don't cooperate." He lets the threat hang in the morning air. Meg straightens slowly, her movements carrying that liquid grace that speaks of skills maintained through years of careful practice. "Cooperation," she observes quietly, remembering similar conversations from the other side, "works best when both parties understand exactly what's being offered and what's at stake." Something in her steady gaze makes the leader shift slightly. In his saddle, some ancient instinct perhaps recognizing the predator behind her peaceful demeanor. The moment stretches like drawn steel before he covers his unease with bravado. "Think about it carefully, Mrs. Thorne. We'll be back tomorrow for the valley's answer, yours included." His attempt at menacing dignity is undermined by the quick jerk of his reins, the too-fast retreat that betrays his discomfort. Through her strategically positioned mirrors, Meg watches them ride away, their departure carrying less confidence than their arrival. Sheriff Taylor approaches as they disappear around the bend, his expression grave. "That went better than expected," he observes, though concern edges his voice. "Though they'll be back, with more men next time. They won't let a woman standing, alone, go unchallenged. Bad for their reputation." "Some reputations," Meg responds softly, her hands returning to their careful work, "are built on false assumptions. Some strengths aren't obvious until they're tested." Sarah hurries forward, her face tight with worry. "Meg, you can't stay out here alone. Not after that. They'll make an example of you, just to prove their power over the valley." Through her window, Meg notes more subtle changes in the community's rhythm. The blacksmith's forge rings with unusual urgency, metal being worked for purposes beyond routine repair. Miller's store sees steady traffic through its back door, supplies being distributed with careful purpose. Even the peaceful Quaker family shows signs of preparation disguised as ordinary activity. "The valley's not as unprepared as they think," she observes quietly, her eyes tracking movement along the ridgeline where more of the Hawkins gang's scouts have appeared. "Some folks have been getting ready, whether they realize it or not." Sheriff Taylor studies her with new attention, perhaps sensing something beneath her careful facade. "You seem mighty calm for someone they just threatened, almost like you've seen such things before." Meg's smile carries no warmth as she continues her work, each movement precise while serving multiple purposes. "Experience," she says softly, "teaches you to recognize patterns, in nature, in farming, in how men choose to approach their business. Through years of orchestrating similar operations, she reads the signs others miss. The Hawkins gang is following a predictable strategy: isolate, intimidate, then break resistance through calculated violence. Amateur work compared to how the Red River Raiders operated, but effective against peaceful communities, unused to organized crime. What they can't know, what even her concerned neighbors don't suspect, is that every threat they make, every move they plan, plays directly into preparations laid over 5 years of patient work. The skills that once made her the most feared outlaw in 3 territories haven't diminished. They've simply been redirected into more purposeful application. The sun climbs higher as Meg completes her morning tasks, each action measured while serving multiple purposes. 5 years of peace have been her choice, but they've also been her preparation. The Hawkins gang thinks they're pressuring another vulnerable widow, never suspecting they're walking into a trap laid by someone who spent years studying exactly how men like them think, move, and make their fatal mistakes. They'll learn, as others learned years before, why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed. Some ghosts may choose peace, but they never forget the skills that made them legendary in the first place. As midday heat shimmers across Willow Creek Valley, Meg observes the mounting tension through her carefully positioned windows. The morning's confrontation has shattered what remained of the community's peace, transforming familiar routines into preparations for inevitable conflict. Through years of orchestrating similar operations, she recognizes the critical moment when fear either breaks a community's spirit or forges it into something stronger. Richard Baker leads another group of farmers toward the church, their formal, meeting clothes incongruous with the rifles slung across their backs. Martha Chen and several other shopkeepers move in the opposite direction, their faces tight with barely contained fear. Sheriff Taylor approaches her property with measured steps that speak of contained urgency. "Thought you'd want to know," he begins, positioning himself where he can watch both the road and the ridge. Council's divided. Baker's group wants to stand firm, says paying them once will just invite more demands. Wilson's gathered enough funds to meet their initial terms, claims it's better than risking everything in a fight we can't win. Meg's hands maintain their steady work sorting farm tools, but her mind processes this information with professional efficiency. "And your deputies?" she asks softly, though she's already noted their absence, the way they've been conspicuously scarce since the morning's confrontation. "Jenkins resigned an hour ago." Taylor's voice carries no judgment, just weary understanding. "Says his family needs him alive. Thompson's staying, but he's young, untested against what's coming." He lets the sentence hang heavy with implication. Through her window, Meg spots Sarah Miller hurrying past, her usual elegant posture replaced by nervous haste. The shopkeeper's wife catches sight of them and pauses, then enters the yard with barely concealed agitation. "Meg, you weren't at the meeting. You need to understand what's happening," Sarah bursts out. "The Hawkins gang, they're not just demanding money. They want control over key properties, influence in valley decisions, starting with the most vulnerable." She glances meaningfully at Meg's modest farm. "Targeting the ones they think can't resist," Meg observes quietly, her fingers never pausing in their work. "Widow-owned farms, family businesses without strong protection." She doesn't add, knowing that's exactly why they singled out her property during their intimidation visit. Through her carefully arranged mirrors, she spots dust on the horizon. More riders approaching from Eagle's Bend. Their formation suggests professional experience, though their obvious approach betrays gaps in tactical awareness. "They're coming back sooner than expected," Taylor warns, noting the same signs. "Word from Cedar Creek says they've gathered more men," Sarah continues, wringing her hands. 40 riders now, all armed with repeating rifles. Richard Baker says, "We should fight, but Martha's cousin told us about her brother's ranch. They tried to resist and—" She trails off, her fear finally breaking through her cultured facade. Meg sets aside her tools with deliberate care, each movement precise while her mind calculates angles, resources, contingencies. She spent years preparing for moments like this, transforming every aspect of her farm into an interlocking series of defensive positions. "Some things," she says softly, her words carrying weight earned in battles these people couldn't imagine. Once given up can't be negotiated back. Some lines, once crossed, change everything that follows. Through her window, she notes more subtle changes in the valley's rhythm. The way certain shutters remain closed despite the heat, how some alleys have been quietly cleared of obstacles, how particular buildings now show signs of reinforcement disguised as routine repair. The valley's not as helpless as they think, Taylor observes, noting the same signs. Some folks have been making preparations, following your example without really knowing it. He pauses, studying her with new awareness. Though I'm beginning to think there's more to your example than most realize. Meg moves to her workbench with that liquid grace that speaks of skills maintained through years of careful practice. Experience, she says quietly, teaches you to prepare for storms before the clouds gather, to recognize patterns, to position. Resources to understand that sometimes the best defense isn't in how obviously you show your strength, but in how carefully you've hidden it. The afternoon deepens as more riders approach her property, their movement carrying the deliberate pace of men conducting reconnaissance. Through years of planning her own operations, she reads their intentions in every gesture, every calculated display of force meant to intimidate. What they can't know, what even her concerned neighbors don't suspect, is that every move they make, every position they take, plays directly into plans laid over 5 years of patient work. The skills that once made her the most feared outlaw in 3 territories haven't diminished. They've simply been redirected into more purposeful preparation. The Hawkins gang thinks they're pressuring another vulnerable widow, never suspecting they're walking into a trap laid by someone who spent years studying exactly how men like them think, move, and make their fatal mistakes. They'll learn, as others learned years before, why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed. Evening descends on Willow Creek Valley as the Hawkins gang's presence grows more assertive. Through her strategically positioned windows, Meg watches their riders patrol the valley with increasing frequency, their movements carrying the confident swagger of men who believe they've found easy prey. The sun casts long shadows across her. Carefully tended fields, each shadow marking ranges and positions she's measured countless times over 5 years of patient preparation. Deputy Thompson arrives at her gate, his young face tight with barely contained tension. "Mrs. Thorne," he calls out, dismounting with the nervous energy of someone bearing unwelcome news. They've taken over the Silver Creek Saloon, using it as their command post, more men arriving hourly. Meg continues her evening routine, each movement precise, while her combat awareness tracks every change in the valley's rhythm. "How many now?" she asks softly, though her experienced eye has already counted their numbers through carefully arranged observation points. 45 at least, Thompson reports, positioning himself where he can watch the eastern approach. Well armed, well mounted, some of them. Some of them look like real hard cases, ma'am. Professional gunmen, not just local trouble. Through years of running with the Red River Raiders, Meg recognizes the type. The Hawkins gang is gathering experienced fighters, building a force meant for more than simple intimidation. Amateur strategy, she thinks, remembering more sophisticated. Operations from her outlaw days. Numbers don't equal victory if you don't understand the ground you're fighting on. Sarah Miller appears at her door, carrying her usual evening basket, though today it holds more than bread. "They're searching properties now," she whispers, glancing nervously at the road. "Looking for weapons, ammunition, anything that suggests resistance. Found Old Man Thompson's rifle cache. Made an example of him right there in the street." Meg's hands never pause in their work, but her mind catalogues this information with professional efficiency. Through her window, she spots more of the gangs, men establishing positions throughout the valley, their attempts at casual presence betraying their tactical intentions to her trained eye. Richard Baker's still talking about fighting, Sarah continues, her voice tight with fear. But after what they did to Thompson, most folks are ready to give them whatever they want just to make it stop. Some things, Meg responds quietly, her fingers tracing patterns on her wooden table that mark exact firing positions, can't be stopped by giving in. Some men see surrender as weakness to exploit, not mercy to honor. Deputy Thompson shifts his weight, perhaps sensing something. Beneath her careful words, "They're asking questions about you," he reports, watching her face for reaction. "About your background, your history before Willow Creek. Seem particularly interested in certain stories they've heard about female outlaws from years back." A ghost of a smile touches Meg's lips as she continues her preparations, each movement serving multiple purposes. Through her carefully positioned mirrors, she watches the Hawkins gang's patrols tighten their pattern around her property, their confidence making them sloppy in ways only a professional would notice. Stories, she muses softly, have a way of finding us, no matter how far we try to leave them behind. Her hands maintain their steady rhythm, while her mind calculates possibilities with combat-honed efficiency. The evening light fades as more riders arrive, their dust adding to the tension hanging over Willow Creek Valley. Meg observes their deployment with professional assessment, noting how they're finally beginning to understand the tactical significance of her farm's location, how they're starting to recognize the defensive potential she's spent 5 years cultivating. "They'll come soon," Thompson warns, watching another patrol pass. "Once they've gathered enough men, established enough positions, they won't risk underestimating any potential threat, not after what happened in Pine Valley." "No," Meg agrees, softly, her movements carrying that liquid grace that speaks of skills maintained through years of careful practice. "They'll bring overwhelming force, thinking that numbers and firepower can overcome any advantage." Her smile carries no warmth as she watches their preparations through her window. They haven't yet understood that this farm, this position, this entire setup has been designed for exactly that approach. The sun touches the horizon, painting Willow Creek Valley in shades of blood and gold. 5 years of peace have been Meg's choice, but they've also been her preparation. Every renovation, every improvement, every seemingly innocent change to her farm has been part of a carefully crafted plan. The Hawkins gang thinks they're preparing for battle against a vulnerable widow. Instead, they're walking into a trap 5 years in the making, orchestrated by someone who never stopped being the predator they've just begun to suspect in their midst. Through the gathering darkness, she notes more subtle signs of their growing realization. How they study her farm with new tactical awareness, how their patrols adjust to cover approaches they previously ignored, how their confidence has been replaced by professional caution. They're beginning to understand what they're facing, but understanding comes too late to change what's already in motion. The night deepens as Meg completes her evening routine, each action precise while serving multiple purposes. The skills that once made her legend haven't diminished. They've simply been redirected into more purposeful preparation. The Hawkins gang is about to learn why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed. Night settles over Willow Creek Valley like a heavy blanket as the Hawkins gang initiates their first coordinated show of force. Through her carefully positioned observation points, Meg watches as teams of riders systematically move through the valley, their torches casting ominous shadows against the darkness. The sound of breaking glass and splintering wood carries clearly through the still air as they begin their intimidation campaign. Sheriff Taylor appears at her back door, his movement silent despite years of wearing spurs. "They're going property by property," he reports, positioning himself where he can observe multiple angles, breaking things, making threats, working their way toward your farm. 48 men that I can count, all armed with repeating rifles. Meg's hands remain steady as she makes final adjustments to positions she's prepared over 5 years. each movement precise while serving multiple purposes. Amateur work, she responds softly, remembering more sophisticated operations from her Red River Raiders days. They're thinking like brigands, not strategists, counting on fear to do their work for them. Through her window, she tracks their deployment patterns, reading their intentions in the way they establish their perimeter. They still haven't understood what they're really facing. The flickering torchlight reveals their positions more clearly than they realize, each movement confirming patterns she's anticipated since choosing this land. "Mrs. Thorne," a voice calls from the darkness, its attempted authority undermined by artificial politeness. "Time to discuss business arrangements, way things are going to be from now on." Meg continues her methodical preparation while her mind calculates trajectories, angles, the precise distances she's measured countless times. "Some arrangements," she calls back, her voice carrying that quiet tone that makes others lean in to hear, "aren't open for discussion. Some choices were made long before this moment." The night erupts with calculated violence as the Hawkins gang demonstrates their power. Hidden marksmen open fire from multiple positions, their shots precise but impacting exactly where her reinforced walls are strongest. Under cover of this barrage, assault teams move forward with professional efficiency, approaching along routes they believe provide adequate protection. "South teams hit the first trap," Taylor reports quietly, noting how their flanking maneuver has encountered the carefully concealed barriers Meg spent years positioning. "They're trying to regroup, but the angle's wrong. They can't advance or retreat without exposing themselves." Through her carefully designed firing ports, she watches Marcus Hawkins directing the operation, his movements carrying the nervous energy of a man discovering his prey might be a predator in disguise. The gang's tactical positions have improved, but their haste reveals gaps that her trained eye catalogues with professional precision. "You've been preparing for this," Taylor observes suddenly, watching her measured movements with growing understanding. "Every fence post, every barn beam, every seemingly random feature of this farm. It's all been positioned for exactly this moment, hasn't it?" Meg's smile carries no warmth as she watches the Hawkins gang's formations deteriorate. "A predator thinks about attacks," she responds, her voice carrying that quiet authority that makes others listen without quite knowing why. "A hunter thinks about patterns, about how prey moves when it believes it has the advantage." The night fills with confusion as their organized assault begins to fragment against defenses they never suspected existed. Teams that should be supporting each other find themselves isolated, communication lines disrupted by obstacles placed years in advance. Their superior numbers become a liability as disorder spreads through their ranks. "They're pulling back," Taylor notes, tracking the gang's attempted reorganization. "Trying to establish a new perimeter, consolidate their forces, but they're moving exactly where you want them, aren't they?" Meg moves to her primary position, with that liquid grace that speaks of skills maintained through years of patient practice. "Men like the Hawkins brothers," she explains quietly, "follow predictable patterns when their plans fail. They retreat to defensible positions, gather their forces, prepare for a stronger assault." Through strategically placed mirrors, she watches them fall back to the Silver Creek saloon, their movements carrying the desperate energy of men discovering their tactical advantage has become a carefully laid trap. They've gathered their forces in what they believe is a defensible position, never suspecting that every window, every doorway, every apparent strongpoint has been measured, marked, and prepared for this exact moment. The night deepens as the Hawkins gang regroups, their initial confidence shattered against defenses they never saw coming. 5 years of peace have been Meg's choice, but they've also been her preparation. They're about to learn why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed, why some warnings carry the weight of hard-won wisdom, and why the deadliest predator isn't always the most obvious, but the one that spent years preparing for exactly this moment. Through the darkness, she watches them struggle with decisions they think lie ahead, unaware that the most crucial choice was made 5 years ago, when an infamous outlaw decided to build something worth defending instead of just taking what she wanted. The skills that once made her legend haven't diminished, they've simply been redirected into more purposeful preparation. The first hints of dawn find Meg calculating the results of the night's initial confrontation with professional efficiency. Through her carefully positioned observation points, she watches the Hawkins gang attempting to reorganize their scattered forces around the Silver Creek saloon. Their movements carry the tension of men discovering their assumed superiority has been severely challenged. Sheriff Taylor maintains his position near her reinforced back wall, his experienced eye tracking the unfolding chaos. "They've lost at least 12 men," he reports quietly, noting the diminished numbers in their patrol. Patterns, not from direct confrontation but from their own confusion, walking into traps they never saw coming. Through her window, Meg observes Marcus Hawkins pacing the saloon's porch, his attempted show of confidence undermined by increasingly frantic gestures as he berates his lieutenants. The gang's initial assault has fractured against defenses they never suspected existed, their superior numbers transformed from advantage to liability in the face of carefully prepared positions. "They're sending riders out," Taylor notes, watching mounted men depart in multiple directions. Calling in reinforcements from other territories, they won't accept being outmaneuvered by a single widow's farm. Meg's hands remain steady as she checks her preparations, each movement precise while serving multiple purposes. "Pride," she observes softly, remembering similar moments from her outlaw days, "makes men mistake stubbornness for strategy. They'll gather more guns, thinking numbers alone can overcome preparation." Sarah Miller appears at the back door, her face tight with a mixture of fear and dawning understanding. "The whole valley's talking about last night," she reports in a hushed voice, "how the mighty Hawkins gang broke against your farm like waves on rocks. Some folks are saying this isn't the first time you've faced such men." Through strategically placed mirrors, Meg tracks more subtle changes in the morning's rhythm. The blacksmith's forge burns hot, though no routine work is being done. Miller's store sees steady traffic through its back entrance, supplies moving with careful purpose. Even the peaceful Quaker family shows signs of preparation disguised as ordinary activity. "Experience," Meg responds quietly, her voice carrying that gentle tone that makes others lean in to hear, teaches you to recognize patterns in nature, in farming, in how men choose to approach their business. Her fingers trace the worn wood of her rifle stock, following lines that mark exact ranges to key positions throughout her property. The morning light strengthens as more riders arrive at the saloon, their dust adding to the tension hanging over Willow Creek Valley. Through years of planning similar operations, Meg reads their deployments with professional assessment. The Hawkins gang is gathering strength, but their hasty preparations reveal gaps in their tactical awareness. "They're talking about burning you out," Sarah whispers, fear sharpening her voice. "Using fire to force you from your positions. Marcus Hawkins was shouting about it in the street, saying no one makes fools of them and lives." Meg's smile carries no warmth as she completes her morning preparations. Fire, she observes softly, reveals more about those who use it than those they target. Through her window, she watches the gang's attempts at reorganization, noting how each position they take plays directly into plans laid over 5 years of patient work. "You knew this would happen someday," Taylor states suddenly, watching, her measured movements with new understanding. Every improvement to this farm, every piece of advice you gave about home defense, every seemingly casual suggestion about property arrangements, you were preparing the whole valley for this moment, weren't you? The morning sun climbs higher as Meg checks her defenses one final time, each action precise while serving multiple purposes. A community, she responds quietly, is strongest when every member understands their role in its defense, when every position supports the others, when every apparent weakness conceals a strength. Through her carefully positioned observation points, she watches the Hawkins gang gathering their forces for what they believe will be a decisive assault. Their numbers have swelled with newly arrived reinforcements, drawn by promises of easy victory and wounded pride. They expect to overwhelm a single defender through sheer force, never suspecting they're walking deeper into a trap laid by someone who spent years studying exactly how men like them think, move, and make their fatal mistakes. They'll come at dawn tomorrow, Taylor predicts, reading the signs of their preparation. Full force, no subtlety now, just raw power trying to overwhelm what they couldn't overcome with tactics. Meg's response carries the weight of years spent hunting men, like the Hawkins brothers, across territories where justice came from the barrel of a gun. Dawn, she agrees softly, is when men like that believe they're strongest, when their numbers seem most impressive against the light. Her hands maintain their steady work while her mind calculates possibilities with combat-honed efficiency. They never learn that true strength isn't in how many guns you bring, but in how carefully you've prepared your ground. Udi. The morning deepens as the Hawkins gang's preparations intensify. They think they're responding to a surprisingly difficult target, adapting their tactics to face unexpected resistance. What they don't understand is that every adaptation, every adjustment, every new position they take plays directly into plans 5 years in the making. The ghost they fear isn't just defending a farm. She's protecting something she built with her own hands, something worth more than all the gold she ever stole with the Red River Raiders. They're about to learn why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed, why some warnings carry the weight of hard-won wisdom, and why the deadliest predator isn't always the most obvious, but the one that spent years preparing for exactly this moment. Night falls over Willow Creek Valley with unnatural stillness as both sides prepare for the coming dawn. Through her carefully positioned observation points, Meg watches the Hawkins gang's final preparations take shape around the Silver Creek Saloon. Their torches cast shifting shadows across the valley, revealing more about their positions than they realize. Richard Baker appears at her back door, moving with the careful silence she taught him over years of seemingly casual hunting advice. "Whole valley's watching," he reports, taking position where he can observe multiple approaches, words spreading about who you really are, about what you did before coming here. Meg's hands maintain their steady rhythm as she makes final adjustments to her defenses, each movement precise while serving multiple purposes. "Stories," she responds softly, "grow in the telling, though sometimes the truth behind them is more dangerous than the legend." Through her window, she tracks the arrival of more riders, their numbers swelling the Hawkins gang's ranks beyond anything the valley has witnessed before. Sheriff Taylor confirms her count from his position near the reinforced wall. 65. "Now," he observes grimly, "all armed with repeating rifles, extra ammunition. They're planning something big for dawn." Sarah Miller hurries through the darkness, her usual grace replaced by urgent purpose. "They're talking in the saloon," she whispers, glancing nervously at the distant torches, "about a woman who rode with the Red River Raiders, who planned their most daring robberies before disappearing 5 years ago, they say." She hesitates, studying Meg with new eyes. "They say she could outthink any lawman, outshoot any gunslinger." A ghost of a smile touches Meg's lips as she continues her preparations. Through years of orchestrating similar operations, She recognizes the moment when reputation becomes its own kind of weapon. The Red River Raiders, she muses quietly, made their share of mistakes, mistook violence for strength, numbers for victory. Never learned that true power lies in how carefully you prepare, not how forcefully you strike. The night air carries fragments of conversation from the saloon where Marcus Hawkins rallies his men. Their voices hold the nervous energy of those who've begun to understand the true nature of their opponent. Through her carefully arranged mirrors, Meg watches them checking weapons, distributing ammunition, making the final preparations of men who believe overwhelming force must triumph over any resistance. They're afraid, Taylor observes, noting the tension in their movements. Not of fighting, but of what they're fighting. The stories about you. They're starting to believe them. Meg's response carries the weight of years spent hunting men like the Hawkins brothers across territories where justice was more suggestion than reality. Fear, she says softly, makes men predictable, makes them rely on what they know. Numbers, firepower, brute force, makes them forget that sometimes the deadliest opponent isn't the most obvious. Through the darkness, she spots more subtle changes in the valley's rhythm. The blacksmith's forge glows with unusual purpose, metal being worked for something beyond routine repair. Miller's store sees constant traffic through its back entrance, supplies moving with careful efficiency. Even the most peaceful families show signs of preparation disguised as ordinary activity. You've been teaching us, Sarah realizes suddenly, watching these movements with new understanding. All these years, every piece of advice about home defense, every suggestion about property improvements, you were preparing us for this moment. Meg's hands never pause in their precise work, but her awareness shifts to combat clarity. A community, she responds quietly, defends itself best when every member understands their role, when every position supports the others, when every apparent weakness conceals a strength. The night deepens as the Hawkins gang's preparations intensify. Through her strategically positioned observation points, Meg watches them gathering their forces for what they believe will be a decisive assault at dawn. Their numbers have swelled beyond their usual strength, drawing in every available gun they could gather on short notice. They think they're preparing to overwhelm a legendary outlaw, adapting their tactics to face a worthy opponent. What they don't understand is that every adaptation, every adjustment, every new position they take plays directly into plans 5 years in the making. 5 years, Taylor muses, watching her measured movements with growing comprehension. 5 years of building something worth defending, of turning a simple farm into a fortress without anyone realizing it. You never stopped being what you were, did you? You just found a better purpose for those skills. Meg's smile carries no warmth as she completes her final preparations. The ghost the Hawkins gang fears isn't just defending a farm, she's protecting something she built with her own hands, something worth more than all the gold she ever stole. They're about to learn why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed, why some warnings carry the weight of hard-won wisdom, and why the deadliest predator isn't always the most obvious, but the one that spent years preparing for exactly this moment. The night settles into tense silence as both sides await the dawn. 5 years of peace have been Meg's choice, but they've also been her preparation. The Hawkins gang is about to discover that some legends aren't just stories told around campfires, but warnings that wise men heed. Dawn approaches Willow Creek Valley with the inevitability of long-awaited reckoning. Through her carefully positioned observation points, Meg watches the Hawkins gang's final preparations take shape against the lightening sky. Their confidence, shaken by the previous night's failures, has been replaced by the grim determination of men whose pride demands victory at any cost. Sheriff Taylor maintains his position near her reinforced wall, his experienced eye tracking the enemy's movements. "They're forming up," he reports quietly, counting shadows that become more distinct with each passing moment. 3 main groups, about 20 men each, trying to coordinate their approach this time instead of that scattered assault from last night. Meg's hands move with practiced efficiency as she makes final adjustments to her defenses, each action precise while serving multiple purposes. Through years of planning similar operations, she reads their intentions in every movement, every position, every subtle shift in their formation. They finally notice the high ground west of the barn. She observes softly, watching riders move to what they believe is a superior firing position. Amateur work, thinking height alone, provides advantage without considering lines of fire. Her fingers trace worn wood, following patterns that mark exact ranges to positions she's prepared. Over 5 years of patient work, Sarah Miller appears like a ghost in the pre-dawn light, her movement carrying the careful silence Meg taught her through years of seemingly casual advice. "The whole valley's awake," she whispers, glancing nervously at the gathering forces. "Everyone's watching, waiting. The stories about you, about who you really are, they're spreading like wildfire." Through her window, Meg tracks Marcus Hawkins as he positions his men with growing desperation. His voice carries across the still morning air, sharp with barely contained fear disguised as authority. "No mistakes this time. We take this farm, we break this woman, or our reputation in 3 territories isn't worth spit." "Pride," Meg muses quietly, remembering similar moments from her outlaw days, "makes men mistake stubbornness for strategy, makes them focus on reputation instead of reality." Her hands never pause in their precise work, but her combat awareness sharpens with familiar clarity. The first rays of sun touch the eastern horizon as the Hawkins gang initiates their assault. Gunfire erupts from multiple positions, their coordinated volleys more professional than their previous attempt. Under cover of this barrage, teams of men advance with careful precision, using approaches they believe provide adequate protection. South groups hit the first line, Taylor reports, watching through carefully concealed ports. They're better organized this time, moving in pairs, covering each other's advance. He pauses, noting how their formation begins to fragment against obstacles they never saw coming. But they still don't understand what they're really facing, do they? Meg's response carries the weight of years spent orchestrating similar operations, now turned to defense rather than attack. "Understanding," she says softly, "comes in different forms." They understand now that they're facing someone with experience, with skill. Her smile carries no warmth as she watches their careful advance transform into confusion. What they haven't grasped is why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed. The morning light strengthens as the Hawkins gang's assault falters against defenses 5 years in the making. Teams that should be supporting each other find themselves isolated by barriers they never suspected existed. Communications break. Downers' carefully prepared positions turn their superior numbers from advantage to liability. "They're calling in their reserves," Sarah observes, watching riders race toward the main force, bringing everything they have left. "Desperation," Meg responds quietly, her voice carrying that gentle tone that makes others lean in to hear. Makes men forget that sometimes the strongest force isn't the most obvious, but the one that spent years preparing for exactly this moment. Through her strategically positioned mirrors, she watches their coordinated assault dissolve into increasing chaos. The Hawkins gang's professional tactics shatter against defenses designed by someone who spent years studying exactly how men like them think, move, and make their fatal mistakes. The sun climbs higher as more riders fall back in confusion, their confidence replaced by the growing realization that they're not facing a simple farmer or even a legendary outlaw. They're confronting 5 years of careful preparation, an entire farm transformed into an interlocking series of defensive positions, a trap laid by someone who never forgot the skills that made her the most feared strategist in the Red River Raiders. "You never stopped being her," Taylor observed suddenly, watching Meg's measured movements with new understanding. "The woman who could outthink any lawman, outmaneuver any posse. You just found something better to fight for." Meg's hands maintain their steady work while her mind calculates possibilities with combat-honed efficiency. "Peace," she responds softly, "isn't just the absence of violence. It's the readiness to defend what matters, to protect what you've built, to stand against those who would destroy it." The morning deepens as the Hawkins gang's assault continues to fragment against defenses they never saw coming. They're about to learn the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the deadliest force isn't the most obvious, but the one that spent years preparing for exactly this moment. 5 years of peace have been Meg's choice, but they've also been her preparation. Some ghosts may choose a quiet life, but they never forget the skills that made them legendary in the first place. The midday sun bears down on Willow Creek Valley as the Hawkins gang's assault dissolves into desperate chaos. Through her carefully positioned observation points, Meg watches their once coordinated teams scatter before defenses they never anticipated, their superior numbers transformed from strength into vulnerability. Sheriff Taylor maintains his vigilant watch, tracking the unfolding disaster with professional assessment. 23 down, he reports quietly, counting fallen figures across the carefully prepared killing grounds. Not from direct confrontation, but from their own confusion, walking into traps they never saw coming. Through her window, Meg observes Marcus Hawkins shouting increasingly frantic orders from his position behind the Silver Creek Saloon. His voice carries the edge of panic as his carefully planned assault crumbles against defenses designed by someone who spent years studying exactly how men like him think. "They're falling back again," Sarah whispers, watching through carefully concealed ports. "But something's different this time. The way they're moving, it's not just retreat." Meg's hands never pause in their precise work, but her combat awareness sharpens with familiar clarity. Through years of orchestrating similar operations, she reads the signs others might miss. "Desperation," she responds softly, "makes men dangerous in ways they don't even understand themselves." The air fills with smoke as the Hawkins gang initiates their final gambit. Torches fly through the morning light, targeting positions they believe will force her from cover. "They're trying to burn you out," Taylor warns, though his voice carries more professional interest than concern. Meg's smile carries no warmth as she watches their attempts at tactical arson shatter against preparations 5 years in the making. "Fire," she observes quietly, "reveals more about those who use it than those they target." Her fingers trace worn wood, following patterns that mark exact ranges to positions she's prepared since claiming this land. Through carefully arranged mirrors, she tracks their increasingly erratic movements. The Hawkins gang's professional discipline has broken completely, replaced by the frantic energy of men discovering they've walked into a trap laid by someone who never forgot the skills that made her legendary. Word spreading through the valley, Sarah reports, her voice carrying new strength, about who you really are, about what you did before coming here, about how you spent 5 years preparing to defend not just your farm, but all of us. Meg's response carries the weight of years spent hunting men like the Hawkins brothers across territories where justice was more suggestion than reality. "A community," she says softly, her voice carrying that gentle tone that makes others lean in to hear, "is strongest when every member understands their role in its defense, when every position supports the others, when every apparent weakness conceals a strength." The day deepens as more of the Hawkins gang's men break ranks, their confidence shattered against defenses they never saw coming. Through her strategic observation points, Meg watches their remaining forces cluster around Marcus Hawkins, their numbers reduced by half since dawn. "They're finished," Taylor observes, reading the signs of impending collapse. "Even if they don't know it yet, you've broken more than their attack. You've broken their spirit." Meg's hands maintain their steady work, while her mind calculates possibilities with combat-honed efficiency. "Understanding," she responds quietly, "comes in different forms. They understand now that they've lost, that they've walked into a trap 5 years in the making." Her smile carries no warmth as she watches their remaining forces gather for what they believe will be one final assault. What they haven't grasped is why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed. Through the midday heat, she observes the subtle signs of their growing realization, how they study her farm with new tactical awareness, how their movements carry the desperate energy of men who've glimpsed their own mortality. They're beginning to understand what they're really facing, not just a legendary outlaw, but someone who spent years preparing for exactly this moment. 5 years, Sarah muses, watching Meg's measured movements with new comprehension. 5 years of building something worth defending, of turning a simple farm into a fortress without anyone realizing it. You never stopped being what you were, did you? You just found a better purpose for those skills. The sun climbs higher as the Hawkins gang makes their final preparations. They think they're gathering for one last desperate push, never suspecting that every move they make, every position they take, plays directly into plans laid over years of patient work. The ghost they fear isn't just defending a farm. She's protecting something she built with her own hands, something worth more than all the gold she ever stole with the Red River Raiders. They're about to learn why some legends aren't just stories told around campfires, but warnings that wise men heed. 5 years of peace have been Meg's choice, but they've also been her preparation. The skills that once made her the most feared. Strategist in 3 territories haven't diminished. They've simply been redirected into more purposeful application. The Hawkins gang is about to discover that sometimes the deadliest force isn't the most obvious, but the one that spent years preparing for exactly this moment. Late afternoon sun casts long shadows across Willow Creek Valley as the Hawkins gang initiates their final desperate assault. Through her carefully positioned observation points, Meg watches their remaining forces gather for one last attempt to overcome defenses that have shattered their reputation and decimated their numbers. Marcus Hawkins's voice carries across the heated air, strained with barely contained panic, disguised as authority. "All or nothing now! Every man forward! We take this farm, or we're finished in 3 territories!" Sheriff Taylor maintains his position near the reinforced wall, his experienced eye tracking their movements. 28 left, he reports quietly. They're grouping tight, planning to concentrate their force in one massive push. No subtlety now, just raw desperation. Meg's hands move with practiced efficiency as she makes final adjustments to her defenses, each action precise while serving multiple purposes. Through years of planning similar operations, she reads their intentions in every movement, every position, every subtle shift in their formation. Their pride's making them predictable, she observes softly, watching them bunch together in what they believe is an overwhelming force, making them forget that sometimes the strongest position is the one your enemy drives you toward. Sarah Miller appears at the back door, her movement carrying the careful silence learned through years of Meg's seemingly casual instruction. "The whole valley's watching," she whispers, glancing at the gathering force. "Every farm, every home. They're saying you planned this, all of it, from the moment you first came here." Through her window, Meg tracks the Hawkins gang's final preparations. Their earlier professional discipline has been replaced by the frantic energy of men who know they're fighting for survival. Planning, she responds quietly, takes different forms. Sometimes it's in how you prepare your ground, sometimes in how you let your enemy choose their own destruction. The afternoon heat shimmers across the valley as the gang initiates their assault. Gunfire erupts in a continuous barrage as they advance in a solid mass, believing their concentrated numbers must eventually overcome any defense. Under cover of their own fire, they push forward with desperate determination. They're committed now, Taylor observes, watching through carefully concealed ports. Every man, every resource, everything they have left thrown into one final push. He pauses, noting how their tight formation begins to work against them. But that's exactly what you wanted, isn't it? Meg's response carries the weight of years spent orchestrating similar operations now turned to defense rather than attack. Understanding, she says softly, comes too late for some men. They see the trap only when they're too deeply caught to escape it. The sun hangs low on the horizon as the Hawkins gang's final assault transforms into their ultimate undoing. Their concentrated numbers, meant to be their strength, become their greatest vulnerability as they trigger defenses designed specifically for this moment. Carefully prepared positions turn their tight formation into a killing ground, their own, mass-preventing effective retreat. They're breaking, Sarah observes, watching the coordinated advance dissolve into chaos. Not just their attack, their whole gang is falling apart. Through her strategically positioned mirrors, Meg watches the moment when realization finally dawns in Marcus Hawkins's eyes. The understanding that he hasn't just failed to take a widow's farm, he's led his entire gang into a trap laid by someone who spent 5 years preparing for exactly this moment. Pride, she muses quietly, her voice carrying that gentle tone that makes others lean in to hear, blinds men to the simplest truths, makes them mistake patience for weakness, preparation for surrender. The afternoon deepens as the remaining gang members scatter, their confidence shattered against defenses designed by someone who never forgot the skills that made her the most feared strategist in the Red River Raiders. Through her carefully prepared positions, Meg watches them flee in different directions, their once mighty gang reduced to desperate individuals running for their lives. "You never stopped being her," Taylor observes suddenly, watching Meg's measured movements with new understanding. The woman who could outthink any outlaw, outmaneuver any gang. You just found something better to fight for. Meg's hands maintain their steady work while her mind calculates possibilities with combat-honed efficiency. Peace, she responds softly, isn't just the absence of violence. It's the readiness to defend what matters, to protect what you've built, to stand against those who would destroy it. The sun settles toward distant hills as the last of the Hawkins gang disappears from Willow Creek Valley. They arrived, believing they'd found another vulnerable community, never suspecting they were walking into a trap 5 years in the making. They're leaving with the understanding that some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed, that some warnings carry the weight of hard-won wisdom, and that sometimes the deadliest force isn't the most obvious, but the one that spent years preparing for exactly this moment. 5 years of peace have been Meg's choice, but they've also been her preparation. The skills that once made her legend haven't diminished. They've simply been redirected into more purposeful application. The Hawkins gang has learned what others discovered years before, that some ghosts may choose a quiet life, but they never forget the skills that made them legendary in the first place. As evening descends on Willow Creek Valley, the full impact of the day's events begins to settle like dust after a storm. Through her carefully positioned windows, Meg watches her neighbors emerge from their homes, moving with the cautious optimism of people who've witnessed something they never thought possible. The Hawkins gang, once feared across 3 territories, has been shattered against defenses laid by a widow farmer they'd mistaken for easy prey. Sheriff Taylor approaches her porch, his stance carrying new respect. "Final counts in," he reports, holstering his weapon for the first time since dawn. 32 of them won't be troubling any more valleys, the rest scattered to the winds, running so hard they left their own wounded behind. Meg continues her evening routine, each movement precise while serving multiple purposes. Through years of orchestrating similar operations, she recognizes the critical moment when victory must be secured before it can truly be celebrated. "Marcus Hawkins?" she asks softly, though her trained eye has already tracked his desperate flight across the eastern ridge. "Rode out with what was left of his inner circle," Taylor confirms. "About 6 men, all of them looking like they'd seen a ghost." He pauses, studying her with new understanding. "Which, in a way, I suppose they did." Sarah Miller arrives with several other townspeople, their faces mixing awe with growing comprehension. "The stories were true, weren't they?" she asks, watching Meg's measured movements. "About the woman who rode with the Red River Raiders, who could outthink any lawman, outfight any gang." Through her window, Meg observes more valley residents gathering, drawn by the need to understand what they've witnessed. Richard Baker leads a group toward her farm, their earlier fear replaced by something closer to reverence. "Stories," Meg responds quietly, her voice carrying that gentle tone that makes others lean in to hear, grow in the telling. Sometimes they become legends, sometimes warnings. Her hands maintain their steady work, while her mind calculates the changes this day will bring. Sometimes they're both. The evening light fades as more neighbors arrive, each carrying their own version of what they've witnessed. Young Tommy Baker, his eyes wide with wonder, describes how the mighty Hawkins gang broke against her farm like waves against a cliff. Martha Chen speaks of 5 years of subtle preparation, of seemingly casual advice that saved lives when the moment of crisis came. "You've been protecting us all along," Sarah realizes suddenly, understanding dawning in her eyes. Every suggestion about home defense, every piece of advice about property improvements. You weren't just building your farm, you were preparing the entire valley. Meg's response carries the weight of years spent learning the true meaning of strength. "A community," she says softly, "defends itself best when every member understands their role, when every position supports the others, when every apparent weakness conceals a strength." Through carefully positioned mirrors, she watches the valley begin to return to its normal rhythm, though something fundamental has changed. The people moving between properties carry themselves differently now, understanding at last that true security isn't found in submission to threats, but in the readiness to stand together against them. "Word's already spreading," Taylor reports, noting riders leaving in multiple directions, about how the notorious Hawkins gang met their match in Willow Creek Valley, about the widow farmer who turned out to be more than anyone suspected. Meg's smile carries no warmth as she completes her evening routine. "Let them talk," she responds quietly. "Some stories serve better as warnings than entertainment. Some reputations are best left undisturbed." The night deepens as the valley's residents begin to disperse, each carrying away their own understanding of what they've witnessed. Through her strategic observation points, Meg watches them move between properties with new awareness, seeing for the first time the defenses she's helped them prepare over 5 years of patient work. "You'll have visitors," Sarah predicts, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Other valleys will want to know how you did it, how one farm stood against the mighty Hawkins gang." What they won't understand, Taylor adds, watching Meg's measured movements, is that it wasn't just about the fight. It was about the 5 years before it, about building something worth defending, about preparing not just a farm, but an entire community. Meg's hands maintain their steady work, while her mind calculates possibilities with combat-honed efficiency. Peace, she responds, softly, isn't just the absence of violence. It's the readiness to defend what matters, to protect what you've built, to stand against those who would destroy it. The evening settles into quiet as Willow Creek Valley absorbs the lessons of the day. 5 years of peace have been Meg's choice, but they've also been her preparation. The skills that once made her the most feared strategist in 3 territories haven't diminished. They've simply been redirected into more purposeful application. The ghost that the Hawkins gang feared wasn't just defending a farm. She was protecting something she built with her own hands, something worth more than all the gold she ever stole. They learned, as others had years before, why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed, why some warnings carry the weight of hard-won wisdom, and why sometimes the deadliest force isn't the most obvious, but the one that spent years preparing for exactly this moment. Dawn breaks over Willow Creek Valley the day after the battle, painting the sky in colors that seem somehow brighter, more significant. Through her farmhouse window, Meg observes the transformed landscape with professional assessment. Signs of yesterday's conflict are already being erased by the valley's residents, working together with new purpose and understanding. Sheriff Taylor approaches her porch, carrying himself with the confident stride of a man who's witnessed something remarkable. Territorial Marshal just rode in, he reports, taking his usual position where he can observe multiple approaches. Old habits that now make perfect sense. Brought a whole posse, ready for a major confrontation. Seems almost disappointed to find the situation already handled. Meg's hands maintain their steady rhythm as she goes about her morning routine, each movement precise while serving multiple purposes. Law enforcement, she observes softly, remembering countless similar situations from the other side, often arrives after the critical moments have passed. Sarah Miller appears with her usual morning basket, though today she carries herself differently, seeing her friend's familiar movements through new eyes. The whole territory's talking about yesterday, she reports, setting fresh bread on the kitchen table. About how the mighty Hawkins gang met their match in a widow farmer. About how one small valley stood against the most notorious outlaws in 3 territories. Through her carefully positioned mirrors, Meg watches more riders approaching. Not threats this time, but curious observers drawn by spreading tales of yesterday's events. Representatives from neighboring valleys, she notes, reading their intentions in their careful approaches. They want to know how you did it, Sarah continues, watching the new arrivals. How one farm stood against such overwhelming odds. How a peaceful widow farmer could outthink and outfight the most dangerous gang in the territory. Meg's response carries the weight of years spent learning the true meaning of strength. They're asking the wrong questions, she says quietly, her voice carrying that gentle tone that makes others lean in to hear. It was never about the fighting. It was about the preparation, about building something worth defending. The morning light strengthens as more visitors gather, drawn by stories already becoming legend. Through her window, Meg observes Richard Baker explaining to newcomers how the valley's defenses worked together, how 5 years of seemingly casual advice had transformed peaceful farms into an interlocking network of defensive positions. You changed more than just this valley, Taylor observes, watching the growing crowd with professional interest. You've shown people there's another way to handle threats like the Hawkins gang. Not through submission or direct confrontation, but through careful preparation and community defense. Through years of orchestrating operations on both sides of the law, Meg recognizes the significance of this moment. Understanding, she responds softly, takes different forms. Sometimes it comes from victory, sometimes from defeat. The wisest learn from both. Sarah watches as more Valley residents arrive, each carrying their own version of yesterday's events to share with eager listeners. "Will you tell them," she asks suddenly, "about who you really were?" The evening deepens as more neighbors gather for their now regular visits, each bringing their own understanding of how their valley has transformed. Young Tommy Baker proudly demonstrates the defensive techniques Meg taught him through seemingly casual hunting lessons. Martha Chen speaks of how 5 years of careful preparation saved not just properties, but lives. "Will you ever tell them?" Taylor asks suddenly, watching these exchanges with professional interest. "The full truth about who you were, about the Red River Raiders, about why you chose this valley for your new life." Through years of balancing different lives, Meg recognizes the value of certain mysteries. "Some truths," she responds softly, "serve better unnamed. Some stories grow, stronger in shadow than in light." And the night settles around Willow Creek Valley as its residents return to their homes, carrying with them the quiet confidence of people who understand their own strength. Through her strategic observation points, Meg watches them move with new purpose, seeing how 5 years of careful preparation has transformed not just their defenses, but their very nature. "You've given us something more than just protection," Sarah says quietly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You've shown us that peace isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about being ready to defend what matters." Meg's hands never pause in their precise work, but her mind calculates possibilities with combat-honed efficiency. "Peace," she agrees softly, "takes different forms. Sometimes it's in how carefully you prepare, sometimes in how patiently you build, sometimes in how fiercely you protect what you've created." The stars emerge fully as Willow Creek Valley embraces its new identity. 5 years of peace have been Meg's choice, but they've also been her preparation. The skills that once made her the most feared strategist in 3 territories haven't diminished. They've simply been redirected into more purposeful application. The ghost that the Hawkins gang feared wasn't just defending a farm, she was protecting something she built with her own hands, something worth more than all the gold she ever stole. They learned, as others had years before, why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed, why some warnings carry the weight of hard-won wisdom, and why sometimes the deadliest force isn't the most obvious, but the one that spent years preparing for exactly this moment. Through her window, Meg watches her community embrace its final evening preparations, stronger for having faced this test, wiser for understanding how it was met. The legend of the widow farmer who broke the Hawkins gang will spread, growing with each telling, becoming something larger than the truth it sprang from. And in the peaceful darkness of Willow Creek Valley, a former outlaw tends her garden, maintains her defenses, and protects the community she's built, not through violence or fear, but through patient preparation and the quiet strength that comes from having something truly worth defending. For some legends aren't just stories told around campfires, but teachings wrapped in mystery. Some ghosts choose peace, not because they've forgotten their power, but because they've found a better way to use it. And some reputations, though buried in the past, never truly die. They simply transform into something more meaningful, more lasting, more worth protecting than all the gold in 3 territories. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. About your time with the Red River Raiders, Meg's hands never pause in their precise work, but her mind calculates possibilities with combat-honed efficiency. Some stories, she says quietly, serve better as mysteries than revelations. Some reputations are best left to imagination than confirmation. The day deepens as Willow Creek Valley becomes a gathering point for those seeking to understand its successful defense. Through her strategic observation points, Meg watches people move between properties with new awareness, seeing for the first time the careful preparations that turned peaceful farms into an impenetrable fortress. The marshal's asking questions, Taylor reports, though his tone carries no concern. About your background, your experience with tactical planning, about how a widow farmer could orchestrate such a sophisticated defense. Meg's smile carries no warmth as she continues her routine. Let them wonder, she responds softly. Some questions are better left unasked, some answers better left unspoken. The morning sun climbs higher as the valley absorbs its new reality. 5 years of peace have been Meg's choice, but they've also been her preparation. The skills that once made her the most feared strategist in 3 territories haven't diminished. They've simply been redirected into more purposeful application. The ghost that the Hawkins gang feared wasn't just defending a farm. She was protecting something she built with her own hands, something worth more than all the gold she ever stole. They learned, as others had years before, why some reputations are earned in blood and better left undisturbed, why some warnings carry the weight of hard-won wisdom, and why sometimes the deadliest force isn't the most obvious, but the one that spent years preparing for exactly this moment. Through her window, Meg watches her community begin its new chapter, stronger for having faced this test, wiser for understanding how it was met. The legend of the widow farmer who broke the Hawkins gang will spread, growing with each telling, becoming something larger than the truth it sprang from. And that, she knows, is exactly as it should be. Evening settles over Willow Creek Valley, 1 week after the battle that shattered the Hawkins gang's power. Through her farmhouse window, Meg observes the transformed landscape as the sun paints. The western sky in shades of gold. The valley has changed in ways beyond the visible signs of conflict. There's a new strength in its people, a quiet confidence born from standing together against a threat they once thought invincible. Sarah Miller appears at her door as dusk approaches, carrying her usual evening basket, though their relationship has deepened beyond simple friendship. More visitors today, she reports, setting freshly baked bread on the kitchen table. 3. More valleys sending representatives wanting to learn about community defense. The story of what happened here. It's spreading faster than spring fire. Meg's hands maintain their steady rhythm as she prepares evening meal, each movement precise while serving multiple purposes. Through years of living both sides of such tales, she understands how stories grow, how they transform from simple truth into something more powerful. Let them talk, she responds softly, her voice carrying that gentle tone that makes others lean in to hear. Sometimes the legend serves better than the reality. Sometimes the mystery teaches more than the truth. Sheriff Taylor arrives as the first stars appear, his stance carrying the relaxed confidence of a man whose territory has found its strength. Word from the territorial marshal, he reports, taking his usual position where he can observe multiple approaches, old habits that now seem natural to them all. Hawkins' gang's finished. What's left of them tried hitting a settlement up north, but the folks there were ready. Seemed they'd heard about a certain widow farmer who showed that preparation. Beats intimidation. Udice through her carefully positioned mirrors, Meg watches the valley's evening routine unfold with new awareness. Farmers check their defenses with casual efficiency. Neighbors maintain clear lines of sight between properties. Children play in Carefully arranged spaces that provide both protection and observation points. You've started something bigger than just defending one valley, Sarah observes, watching these movements with understanding. You've shown people they don't have to choose between submission and suicidal resistance, that there's another way, if they're willing to prepare for it. Meg's response carries the weight of years spent learning the true meaning of strength. A community, she says quietly, is like a garden. It grows strongest when every plant supports the others, when every apparent weakness becomes part of its defense.